My name is Alex, I'm 32, and for most of my life, I've been what you might call a background character in my own family's story. I'm a contractor, I build things with my hands, and I've always found more comfort in the solid logic of blueprints and timber than in the shifting, treacherous currents of family dynamics. That all changed with a single phone call 3 months ago, a call that ripped the backdrop off the stage and threw me into a spotlight I never asked for. The phone buzzed on the console of my truck, displaying a name I hadn't seen in nearly a year, Leo. My older brother. The golden child, calling from his sun-drenched paradise in Hawaii where he was supposedly living the dream running a boutique hotel our parents had bankrolled. I almost let it go to voicemail, but a strange premonition made me answer. His voice, usually so smooth and confident, was thin and reedy. Alex? Hey. Listen, I have a weird question, he started. No pleasantries, no how have you been, he just dove right in. Where is your wife? The question hung in the air, heavy and bizarre. My wife? I looked over at the passenger seat where Sarah was scrolling through her phone, her brow furrowed in concentration as she looked up material specs for a client's kitchen remodel. We'd been married for 2 years, but to my family, she was practically a ghost. They'd met her once, briefly, and showed minimal interest. Why would Leo be asking about her now? I knew, with a gut-wrenching certainty, that this wasn't about her. It was about me. It was the opening move in a game I didn't know we were playing, but for which, unbeknownst to them, I had been preparing my entire life. I took a slow, deliberate breath and replied, "She's right here, Leo." Planning our next move, the double meaning was entirely for my own benefit, a small, private promise of the storm that was about to break. Before I continue and tell you how that one question led to the unraveling of a lifetime of lies and entitlement, do me a favor. If you've ever been made to feel like the family backup plan, the emergency fund, or the forgotten child, hit that like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to build your own damn life raft while everyone else was sailing on a yacht you were expected to fuel. My childhood was a masterclass in learning my place. It wasn't a place of malice or overt cruelty, but one of quiet, pervasive neglect. It was the simple, soul-crushing reality of being the second-choice son. Leo was born with a spotlight on him, I was born in his shadow. Our family photo albums tell the story better than I ever could. Page after page of Leo's firsts, first steps, first tooth, first T-ball trophy, first school dance with a corsage pinned to his lapel. My firsts are conspicuously absent, documented only in my own memory. When Leo turned 16, a gleaming red convertible appeared in the driveway, a massive bow on the hood. My father clapped him on the back, beaming, telling him he'd earned it, though nobody could say how. When I turned 16, I was handed a bus schedule and told that my part-time job at the hardware store would teach me the value of $1. The lesson I actually learned was that my time and effort had a different value than my brother's. University was the same story. My parents liquidated savings to send Leo to a private out-of-state college, covering his tuition, his dorm, and his generous lifestyle allowance. He majored in business, which mostly seemed to involve joining a fraternity and posting pictures from beach parties. I went to a local community college, paying my own way by working grueling hours stocking shelves and eventually, doing odd jobs that taught me the basics of construction. When I'd come home, exhausted, smelling of sawdust and sweat, my mother would look at me with a pained expression. "Alex, honey," she'd say, her voice laced with that soft, manipulative pity, "don't you want more for yourself? Look at your brother. He's making connections, building a future." My father was more direct. "You need to be more ambitious," he'd grunt from behind his newspaper. "Why can't you be more like Leo?" They saw my calloused hands as a sign of failure, not effort. They saw my exhaustion as a lack of drive, not a consequence of self-reliance. Every dollar I saved, every skill I learned, was invisible to them. It didn't fit the narrative they had constructed, a narrative in which Leo was the investment and I was just there. The spare part. The responsible one they could count on to not cause trouble, precisely because they offered no support that could enable it. This wasn't just about money, it was about attention, validation, and love. This was a finite resource, and it had been fully allocated before I was even old enough to understand what I was missing. I learned early on that asking for anything, help, praise, even just a moment of their undivided attention, was pointless. It would only lead to a sigh, a redirected conversation back to Leo's latest triumph, and a fresh, stinging reminder of my own invisibility. So I stopped asking. I turned inward, finding validation in a well-set joint, a perfectly level shelf, a job well done. I learned to be my own father, my own cheerleader, because I had no other choice. After 2 years of community college, I knew the academic path wasn't for me. My passion was in building, in creating tangible things. I saw an ad for an apprentice carpenter at a small, high-end construction firm run by a man named Frank Henderson. Frank was in his late 60s, with hands like gnarled oak and eyes that saw everything. He hired me on the spot. He became the mentor I never had, the father figure I'd always craved. He didn't just teach me how to frame a wall or cut a dovetail joint, he taught me how to read people, how to bid a job, how to run a business. "You've got the knack, kid," he'd say, clapping sawdust from my shoulders. "But more than that, you've got the hunger. Don't ever let anyone make you feel ashamed of that." For 5 years, I was his shadow. I absorbed everything. I saved every penny I could, living in a tiny apartment, driving a beat-up truck, and pouring all my energy into learning the trade. My family remained oblivious. To them, I was still Alex, the handyman, a slightly embarrassing tradesman they could mention in passing. They never asked about my work, my ambitions, or my life. When Frank decided to retire, he sat me down in his dusty office. He offered to sell me the business, the tools, the truck, the client list, everything, for a price that was criminally low. "It's not a handout, Alex," he said, fixing me with his steady gaze. "It's an investment. I'm investing in you because you're the best damn investment I've ever seen." It was the first time anyone had ever said anything like that to me. I used every cent of my savings for the down payment and took out a loan for the rest. Henderson Contracting became A.M. Contracting, my initials, my future. For the next few years, I worked relentlessly. I took the small jobs no one wanted and did them perfectly. Word of mouth spread. The quality of my work spoke for itself. Soon, I was hiring my first employee, then a second. I bought a new truck, then another. I was bidding on and winning large-scale custom home projects. I was quietly, secretly, becoming incredibly successful. It was during this time that I met Sarah. She was an interior designer on one of my projects. She was sharp, funny, and saw right through the quiet, unassuming facade I presented to the world. She saw the ambition, the passion, and the deep-seated hurt. She was the one who first called my family's dynamic what it was, toxic. "They don't see you, Alex," she told me one night. "They see a reflection of their own failures and a safety net for their favorite son." Her validation was like a key turning in a lock I didn't even know was rusted shut. We fell in love, and for the first time, I felt like I was building a life, not just a business. We bought a beautiful home in a quiet neighborhood, a testament to our hard work. But I kept the full extent of my success a secret from my family. They knew I was self-employed, but they pictured me in a tool belt fixing leaky faucets, not managing multiple crews on six-figure architectural builds. I knew, instinctively, that if they ever found out, they wouldn't see my success as something to celebrate. They would see it as a resource to be tapped. That phone call from Leo was the first tremor of the earthquake. After I hung up, Sarah looked at me, her expression serious. "What was that about? Why on earth is he asking where I am?" I gripped the steering wheel, a cold dread coiling in my stomach. "I don't know," I admitted, "but it's not good. It's the first time he's called me in a year. Something's wrong on his end, and he's looking for a solution on mine." My prediction proved correct with horrifying speed. That evening, my mother called. Her voice was a symphony of forced casualness and rising panic. "Alex, darling. We were just talking about you. Your father and I are so worried about Leo." She launched into a rambling, edited version of the situation. The hotel was facing some temporary cash flow issues. The tourism market was unexpectedly soft. It was all bad luck, a string of unforeseeable events. She never once used words like a mismanagement or incompetence. Then came the pivot. "You're doing so well for yourself, honey," she cooed, a line she'd never used before. "That little business of yours must be keeping you busy. We are so proud." It was the most transparently manipulative praise I had ever received. The conversation was a preamble, the appetizer before the main course of entitlement. That arrived the next day, via a call from my father. He dispensed with the niceties. "Alex, your brother is in trouble. The hotel needs a capital injection to stay afloat. We've done all we can. It's your turn to step up." I asked the question I already knew the answer to. "How much?" "He needs $150,000, Alex. It's a loan, of course. He'll pay you back once things turn around." A loan. To the brother who still owed me $1,000 from 5 years ago. To the man who had never successfully managed a budget in his life. The sheer audacity of it left me speechless. I told him I'd have to think about it, which was a lie. There was nothing to think about. My father's tone hardened. "There's nothing to think about. This is family. This is your brother. We took care of him, we took care of you. It's your duty to help." The gaslighting was breathtaking. They took care of me? They had provided a roof and food, the bare minimum of parental responsibility, while emotionally and financially abandoning me at every turn. The calls and texts became a deluge. Leo pleaded, talking about his dream turning into a nightmare. My mother cried, accusing me of being cold and selfish. My father sent terse, demanding messages about honor and responsibility. They were a united front, a pack of wolves that had scented blood, convinced their designated prey had a moral obligation to lay down and be devoured. They had no idea they were no longer chasing a frightened sheep, but a lion who had finally learned to roar. The final summons came a week later, a mandatory family meeting at my parents' house. "We need to talk about this face to face," my father's text commanded. It's time for an intervention. I knew then and there this was it. This was the moment the stage would burn. The air in my parents' living room was thick with accusation. It was the same room where I'd watched Leo open gifts for years, the same room where my achievements went unmentioned and my struggles were ignored. Now, I was its focal point. My parents sat opposite me on their floral sofa, a tribunal of disappointment. Leo was on a recliner to the side, looking tanned but haggard, a potent combination of entitlement and desperation. I had brought Sarah with me, a decision my mother clearly disapproved of, her lips tightening into a thin line when we walked in. I also brought a sleek, leather-bound portfolio. My father began, his voice low and resonant with patriarchal authority. "Alex, we are deeply disappointed in you. Your brother, your own flesh and blood, is on the verge of losing everything, and you won't even consider helping him," my mother chimed in, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. "We didn't raise you to be so unfeeling. After everything we've done for you. We gave you a home, we supported your endeavors." She trailed off, unable to actually name a single endeavor they had supported. Leo finally spoke, his voice cracking. "I don't get it, man. It's a loan. I would do it for you." The irony was so profound it was almost funny. He wouldn't, and he couldn't. He had nothing. They spent the next 20 minutes listing my supposed moral failings. I was selfish. I was ungrateful. I had forgotten where I came from. I was hoarding my little bit of savings when my family was in crisis. I let them exhaust themselves, their arguments growing more circular and pathetic. When they finally fell silent, looking at me with expectant, judgmental eyes, I calmly leaned forward and placed the leather portfolio on the coffee table between us. I unzipped it. "You're right about one thing," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I have been holding out on you. You have no idea what my life is actually like." I slid the first page across the table. It was a professionally photographed spread of a multi-million-dollar home I had recently completed, a stunning modern design of glass and cedar. My mother gasped. I slid out another. A list of my company's commercial clients, including several well-known corporations in the city. then another, an asset summary detailing my business holdings, the fleet of 5 trucks, the workshop property I owned outright, and my investment portfolio. I saved the best for last, a certified statement of my business's net worth, a number with 7 figures. Silence. A deep, profound, echoing silence filled the room. My father's jaw was slack. My mother's face had gone completely pale. Leo looked as if I had physically struck him. The shock was visceral. But then, in a split second, I watched it happen. The shock melted away, and a new expression dawned on their faces, particularly on my father's and Leo's. It was the naked, unmistakable gleam of greed. My father cleared his throat, a pathetic, wheezing sound. "Well," he said, his voice suddenly oily and conspiratorial. "Well, Alex. In that case, 150,000 is nothing to you. You can easily help your brother out." The mask hadn't just slipped, they had ripped it off and set it on fire. I looked at my father, then at my brother, then at my mother, who was staring at the papers on the table as if they were a winning lottery ticket that had just landed in her lap. The last shred of hope I held for their character, a tiny, foolish ember I didn't even know was still glowing, was finally extinguished. I felt a profound, liberating calm settle over me. The anger and hurt I had carried for years solidified into something hard and immovable, a boundary. I slowly began to gather the documents, placing them back into the portfolio with deliberate care. "You're right," I said, my voice devoid of the emotion they expected. $150,000 isn't a life-altering amount of money for me anymore. But you're wrong about everything else. I zipped the portfolio shut and placed it on the floor beside my chair. I looked directly at Leo. "This hotel, this dream of yours. It wasn't a dream, it was a gift. A gift you were not equipped to handle because you were never taught the meaning of work, responsibility, or consequence. You were handed a future, and you squandered it. That is not my fault." I then turned to my parents. "And you," I said, my gaze sweeping over both of them. "You talk about everything you've done for me, and let's be clear. You gave Leo a head start. You gave me a lesson. The lesson was that I was on my own. You taught me to be self-reliant because I had no other choice. You taught me to save every dime because no one was going to bail me out. You taught me to work harder than anyone else because I had no safety net." I leaned forward slightly. "So, in a way, you're responsible for all of this." I gestured to the portfolio on the floor. "This success, this money you're all drooling over now? I built it on a foundation of your neglect. This is the result of every time you told me to be more like my brother. I became his opposite. I became responsible. I became successful. And you didn't even notice." My mother started to cry, real tears this time. "Alex, how can you say that?" "Because it's the truth," I said, my voice firm. "And here's another truth. Not $1 of the life I have built will be used to subsidize your mistakes. My money will go towards the future of the family that Sarah and I are building. A family built on mutual respect, support, and love. Things I never got here." I stood up. Sarah, who had been silent and strong beside me this whole time, stood up with me, her hand finding mine. "This intervention is over," I declared. "This conversation is over. The bank of Alex is permanently closed." I turned and walked toward the door, not looking back. I could feel their stunned, disbelieving stares on my back. For the first time in my life, I was walking away from them, and instead of feeling loss, I felt nothing but the exhilarating, terrifying, and beautiful weight of my own freedom. The days following the confrontation were a war of attrition fought through screens and airwaves. My family, reeling from their public humiliation and the shock of my refusal, regrouped and launched a full-scale emotional assault. The first wave was the guilt campaign, led by my mother. She left long, rambling voicemails, her voice thick with tears, accusing me of destroying the family. "I don't know who you've become, Alex," she sobbed in one message. "Your father is so hurt he can't even speak. You're tearing us apart over money. Is that what you value more than your own blood?" It was a masterful performance, painting me as the cold, materialistic villain and them as the wounded, loving victims. Next came my father's offensive. His messages were short, brutal, and filled with impotent rage. They were commands, not requests. "You will fix this," one text read. "This is your responsibility as a son. Stop this foolishness and do the right thing." He was trying to reassert an authority he no longer possessed, an authority I now realized was built entirely on a foundation of my perceived weakness and obligation. Leo's attempts were the most pathetic. He alternated between begging and trying to evoke a shared childhood that I remembered very differently. "Come on, man, remember when we used to build forts in the backyard?" he texted. "We were a team." "I need my team now," I wanted to text back. "You mean the forts I built while you sat inside and watched cartoons?" But I didn't. Silence was my new weapon. Sarah was my rock. She vetted the calls, deleted the voicemails before I could hear them, and reminded me constantly that their panic was a symptom of their own dysfunction, not my failure. "They're not angry because you're a bad son," she said, wrapping her arms around me one evening as I stared at my phone, another call from my mother vibrating on the screen. "They're angry because the ATM is refusing to dispense cash." My chosen family, my work crew, and my best friend, Mark, also rallied. They had known about my family situation for years. When I told them what happened, they weren't surprised. They were proud. "It's about damn time, man," Mark said, clapping me on the shoulder. "You've been carrying them on your back your whole life without even realizing it." The final, desperate tactic was the recruitment of flying monkeys. My aunt, my mother's sister, called me. She had been fed the heavily redacted story. "Alex, your mother is beside herself. Whatever is going on, can't you just find it in your heart to help them? Family is all we have." I calmly explained the full context to her, the decades of favoritism, the secret success, the greedy reveal. To her credit, she listened and fell silent. "Oh," she finally said, her voice small. They didn't mention any of that." I held firm, blocking their numbers, creating a wall of silence. I focused on my work, on my life with Sarah, on the peace I was building. The manipulation was a storm raging outside my door, but for the first time, my house was built of brick, and I refused to let the wolves blow it down. The universe has a way of ensuring that consequences, though sometimes delayed, are rarely denied. Without my infusion of cash, my brother's Hawaiian dream imploded with spectacular speed. My sympathetic aunt, who had become a quiet source of information, gave me the updates in short, sad phone calls. The hotel went into foreclosure. Leo, stripped of his business and his inflated sense of self, had to declare bankruptcy. The grand finale was him flying home, in economy class this time, and moving back into his childhood bedroom at the age of 34. But the shrapnel from that explosion hit my parents as well. It turned out they had done more than just give Leo the initial investment. They had co-signed on his business loans, confident in their golden child's inevitable success. With the business gone, the banks came for them. The beautiful home I had grown up in, the stage for so many of Leo's triumphs and my quiet heartbreaks, went up for sale. They were forced to sell it to cover the debts and downsize to a small, cramped rental apartment in a less desirable part of town. Hearing this news didn't bring me the burst of triumphant joy my younger self might have fantasized about. There was no "I told you so" celebration. Instead, I felt a deep, hollow sadness. It was the somber feeling of watching a structure collapse under the weight of its own flawed design. Their downfall was a direct result of the toxic system they had created and perpetuated, their blind faith in their favored son and their complete disregard for their other one. Their choices had finally, irrevocably, caught up with them. While their world was shrinking, mine was expanding. Free from the constant, low-grade stress of their disapproval and the weight of my unspoken resentment, I felt lighter. My business thrived. The creative energy I had once wasted on navigating my family's emotional minefield was now channeled into my work and my relationship. Sarah and I took that period to focus on us. We solidified our future, not with frantic ambition, but with peaceful intention. One evening, sitting on the deck of the home we had built together, watching the sunset, I asked her to marry me. Her yes was the final brick in the foundation of my new life. We began to heal. I started talking to a therapist to unpack the complex baggage of my upbringing, to learn how to fully internalize the self-worth I had fought so hard to build externally. I was learning that true strength wasn't just about standing up to them, it was about healing the parts of me that had been wounded by them for so long. About 6 months after the confrontation, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello?" A hesitant, fragile voice on the other end said, "Alex." It's Mom." She sounded completely different. The confident, manipulative edge was gone, replaced by something I had never heard from her before, humility. I was silent for a moment, waiting. "I know you have no reason to want to talk to me," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "But I needed to call. I needed to say, I'm sorry. We were wrong. About everything." It wasn't a grand, eloquent apology. It was broken and imperfect. She didn't try to justify their actions or make excuses. She just admitted fault. "We saw your success, and all we thought about was how it could solve our problems," she confessed, the word sounding difficult for her to say. "We never stopped to think about what it meant for you, what you had to do to achieve it. We never saw you, Alex. We only saw what we wanted to see. I am so sorry." I listened, my own emotions a tangled mess. Part of me was still angry, still hurt. But another, larger part recognized the monumental effort this must have taken for her. This was the first time in my 32 years that my mother had ever admitted to being wrong about anything. I didn't offer immediate forgiveness or absolution. I didn't say, "It's okay," because it wasn't. But I did offer a sliver of grace. "Thank you for saying that, Mom," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I appreciate the call." A week later, she called again and asked if I would be willing to meet her for coffee. Sarah and I discussed it at length. "You don't owe them anything," she reminded me gently. "But if you think it will help you, then you should go. On your terms." I agreed to meet my mother. I chose the place, a neutral coffee shop, halfway between our homes. I chose the time. I set the boundary before we even sat down. "I'm happy to talk, Mom," I told her as we got our drinks. "But I want to be clear. My finances are not a topic for discussion. My marriage is not a topic for discussion. We can talk about the future, but the past is what it is. And there will be no more requests for help." She just nodded, her eyes filled with a sad understanding. It was an awkward, stilted conversation, but it was a start. It was the first honest conversation we'd ever had. It wasn't a reconciliation in the storybook sense, but it was a tentative first step onto a new, uncharted path, one where a relationship might, just might, be rebuilt on a foundation of respect instead of obligation. Looking back on it all now, from the peace of my own home with my incredible wife by my side, the journey feels both impossibly long and incredibly swift. The phone call from Leo wasn't the beginning of the story, it was merely the catalyst that forced the ending of an old one. For years, I had operated under the false belief that my worth was something that had to be granted to me by my parents. I worked tirelessly, chasing a form of validation they were incapable of giving. The great, painful, and ultimately liberating lesson was that I had to be the one to validate myself. My worth wasn't in my bank account or the size of my company, it was in the resilience I had built, the integrity with which I worked, and the love I was capable of giving and receiving from people who truly saw me. My relationship with my family is a work in progress. My mother and I speak occasionally. The conversations are cautious, but they are real. My father remains distant, his pride a fortress I have no interest in storming. I haven't spoken to Leo since that day in the living room. Perhaps one day he will understand the damage his entitlement caused, but I'm not waiting for it. I hold no ill will, only a detached sadness for the brotherly relationship we never had. My true family is the one I have chosen and built. It's Sarah, my partner in every sense of the word. It's my mentor, Frank, who still calls to check in. It's my crew, the guys who have my back every day. These are the people who celebrate my successes without calculation and support me through my struggles without judgment. The most important thing I learned is that you cannot force someone to respect you. You can only set the price of your own company, and that price is respect. You teach people how to treat you by what you are willing to accept. Walking away from that confrontation was the hardest and best decision I ever made. It wasn't about punishing them, it was about saving myself. It was about declaring that my life, my success, and my love were my own, not resources to be plundered to pay for the bad decisions of others. And that self-respect is a foundation upon which you can build an extraordinary life. So now I turn it back to you. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to draw a hard line with your own family? Let me know your story in the comments below. And if this message resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear that they have the right to build their own house, lock their own door, and decide for themselves who gets a key.